Today's shiur begins 11 lines from the bottom of Daf Mem Vov. Before we begin the actual Gemara, which will open up with a question, we glance at the side where we have a nosei, a topic heading. Birur, we're going to clarify or analyze. Be'ezen nesibois cholku rabbanon Reb Ozer ben Yaakov. We saw in our Mishnah that we learned in our previous shiur a machlokes between Rabbanon and Reb Ozer ben Yaakov in the case of partners, shutvim, that had been bound by vows not to benefit from one another. The Rabbanon said that they are not able to enter the courtyard, and Reb Ozer ben Yaakov, relying upon the concept of breira, retroactive determination, does allow each one to enter the courtyard. Dafka bin Nodru, is this machloikis limited to the case of Nodru, where each one initiated the neder by saying, I do not want, I refuse to benefit, I prohibit upon myself benefit from you. So it's we'll call it a self-imposed vow. Avol, behediru ze eze modu rabbanon, dechol echad nichnas l'soich shaloi. However, if it would be a case where each partner had imposed a vow on the other friend, in other words, Mr. A says to Mr. B, his partner, I don't want you, Mr. B, benefiting from my property, where each one, we'll say the mudar, the victim of the vow, is in a situation beyond his control. So in a case like that, maybe the Rabbanon would concede to Reb Ozer ben Yaakov that each one is entitled to walk into the jointly held property relying on breira. Or possibly afilu behediru zeh cholkim in Reb Ozer ben Yaakov. It could be, and that's what the Gemara raises as a second possibility, that even in the case of hediru zeh, where each partner had imposed a restriction on the other fellow not to benefit from his property, the Rabbanon may, in that case also, maintain their position of a prohibition of going into the chotzer altogether, even though the prohibition, when you look at it regarding each partner, was a prohibition imposed on him beyond his control. The other partner had imposed the prohibition. The Gemara, in order to appreciate this Gemara, one will benefit more if he has we'll say sensitivity to a language distinction between the terms nodru versus hediru. So now we read the question. You notice how we've marked it as a long question. Ibayalo, the question is raised regarding our Mishnah. Ben nodru pligi. Are we to understand that the Mishnah is to be taken, we'll say, literally? The Mishnah opened up with the words hashutfim shenodru, and nodru means that A said to Mr. B, I, Mr. A, don't want to benefit from your property. And B said to Mr. A, I don't want to benefit from your property. And under those circumstances, we see the machlokes that we described between the Rabbanon and Reb Ozer ben Yaakov. So that is clear that is an issue. That's a point of machlokes. Hediru ze mai. What about a case where instead of Mr. A saying to Mr. B, I, A, don't want to benefit from you, Mr. B, rather A says to Mr. B, you, Mr. B, cannot benefit from my property. Mi amrinon ben nodruhu de pligi. Do we say that in the case of nodru, they have their controversy, the chachamim with Reb Ozer ben Yaakov? Avo behidiru zeh modu le rabbanon le Reb Ozer ben Yaakov. Dechi anusim domu. But in a case where the restriction was imposed on the individual by the other one, so he, the victim, in that case is honest. It's something that's beyond his control. I didn't impose the restriction on the property. The partner prohibited me from benefiting from his share. So in a case like that, maybe the Rabbanan would concede to Rabbi Ozer that each one can go into the chotzer on the grounds of breira. Oy dilma, afilu behediru zeh pligi Rabbanan. Or it could be that even in that case of hidiru zeh, the Rabbanan will maintain their position, no entrance, making no distinction between oinus and rotzam. Toshma. So the Gemara responds with a quote, Hoyo echod mehem mudar hano mechavero. Now that, you can see we have an arrow. It is to be aligned with the arrow's second line from the top. Also a quote from our Mishnah. And what are we describing here? One was mudar hano mechavero. That means he was the victim of a neder made by the other guy. The other guy imposed on him a neder. That's hediru. And in that we see upligi rabbanan. Even in that case, the rabbanan said, third line from the top, lo yikonis l'chotzer. He said, the rabbanan said he cannot enter the field, even though, or the chotzer, he can't enter the courtyard, even though the vow was imposed on him by someone else. The Gemara says this is not conclusive. Tani, restate, or better yet, re-understand the case of Mudar Hano Mechavero, not because the vow was imposed by the other guy on him, but Nodur Mechavero Hano. He had imposed on himself a vow not to benefit from his friend. And of course, were you imposed on yourself the restriction, so then you cannot go in according to the Rabbanan. Hochi Nami Mistabra. It's most likely that in a case of nodru, where each one imposed on himself the restriction, is that, and only then, you have the machloikes. The Katani Seifa, the continuation of the Mishnah, had said, the kaifen es hanoider limkor es chelko. We force the noder to sell his holding in the property. If you say that the Mishnah is describing cases where the vow was self-imposed, then I understand why we'll force him to sell off his holding. In other words, you initiated a vow on yourself, self-imposed restriction, and with that, we'll say, causing a limitation in benefit. So you have to sell off your holding. The Tosfos adds an element of clarity here, and that is, if you imposed a vow on yourself not to benefit from your friend's property, and in this case from his holding, from his share in the chotzer, we will force you to sell your portion so that you don't come to a takola, as Tosfos says. What's a takola? So you don't come to stumble, to mistakenly go into a piece of property that you had imposed a restriction on yourself. So to prevent takola, we'll force you to sell the property. However, Eloi Amris, the Gemara continues, the adrei, if you say that the restriction is something that the friend imposed on his fellow partner, why do we force him to sell his holding in the property? The restriction that was imposed upon him was against his will. It was not something that he had intended for. And here you have the Rosh adds another dimension of understanding. Notice the Rosh at the end of the Rosh commentary. Ma posha hamudar shia. What sin, what wrongdoing did the mudar do? Shia chafu limkor chelko, that will force him to sell off his portion in the property. Shimato Imer Kain, if you say, yeah, we can force someone upon whom restriction was placed to sell off his holding. You know what's going to happen? Everyone who has, let's say, big eyes, that's desirous of being the exclusive owner of the property, all he'll do is he'll impose a vow on his friend, and that will force the partner to sell off his holding. And of course, that's totally unacceptable. So, with this reading of the Seifa, it becomes clear that the machloikis in the Mishnah is in a case where each partner had accepted upon himself self-imposed restriction of benefiting from the other person's property. As we continue in the Gemara, we have a new marking. We see a diamond and a squiggle underline used on the side of under the mivneh. We indicate these are Beis Deos Bezeiri. There are two opinions as to what Zeiri says. So the first opinion you see Rabbah, and as we go to Omid Beis, you see 5 lines from the top, Rav Yosef with his version of Zeiri. Omar Rabbah, Omar Zeiri. Machloikes, we're continuing at the top of Omid Beis. Machlokes kishiesh ba kedei chaluka. The machlokes in our Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Ozer ben Yankiv is when you have a chotzer, a piece of property that is subject or is worthy of division, that is capable of being divided, which means that after division, each one would have 4 amos. 4 amos for this one and 4 amos for that one. That you're dealing with a chotzer that measures 8 amos. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading featuring the double underline where the terms machloikis and divrei kol are emphasized. Deos be'ezin nesibos choku or hiskim rabbanim Rabbi Ozer ben Yankiv. Under what circumstances do Rabbi Ozer ben Yankiv and the rabbanon argue? B'chotzer sheyesh ba kedei chaluka, b'chotzer she'ein ba kedei chaluka. What is the size of the chotzer? So, according to Rabbah's version of Ziri, the machloikis is when the chotzer measures a total of 8 amos. Aval ein ba kedei chaluka, if it's smaller than that, and that the resultant portion after division would be less than 4 amos per person, divrei hakol, everyone, even the Rabbanan, will agree mutar. It's mutar for each one to walk into the chotzer and rely on breira. The Gemara continues, Omar le Rav Yosef Harei Beis HaKnesses. The example of a synagogue. This is an example that we haven't seen yet in the Mishnayos, but the Gemara is going to quote an upcoming Mishnah. The case of the synagogue. The kamish she'ein bo kedei chaluka domi. A synagogue is something that is not subject to division. Every part of the synagogue is necessary for each worshipper. It's not something that is subject to division. You can't say, well, you take the front half of the synagogue and I would take the back half of the synagogue. So the synagogue can be described as something that's ein bo kedei chaluka, which would be parallel to the case of the chotzer measuring less than 8 amos. Utnan, and the Mishnah Daf Memche says, regarding partners that are forbidden to benefit from one another, it says, Shnehem asurim b'dover shel oiso ha'ir. Both of them cannot benefit from items that are owned under the control of that particular city, that municipality. And a shul is an example of that. So what is it saying then? That neither one or both of them cannot go into the shul. Neither one can go into the synagogue. And with that, you have a kasha on Rabbah. Here, what did Rabbah say about ein ba kedei chaluka? That even the Rabban and everyone agree you're allowed to go in. Here you see, that's not so. Here you see an opinion that says that on a parallel case, they are both prohibited from entering. Ela Omar Rav Yosef, Omar Zeiri, Machloikis she'ein ba kedei chaluka. The Machloikis Tanoim arises in a case where the item or the property is not subject to division. That's when you'll have a machlokes. The Rabbanan will tell you cannot go in, and that would be the opinion in the Mishnah Daf Mem Ches. Avol yesh bo kedei chaluka. If it's something that can be divided, then Divrei HaKol Ozer, even Rebbe Ozer ben Yankov will agree that it's forbidden to go in because there's an alternative solution. Divide it. Each one will then take their half or their share in the holding, and thereby not violating the vow whatsoever. And each one will then go into his clearly defined portion. Omar Rav Huna halacha ke Rebbe Ozer ben Yankov. V'chein Omar Rebbe Ozer halacha ke Rebbe Ozer ben Yankov. So you have the Gemara ruling like Rebbe Ozer ben Yankov, and that would mean, according to, let's say, Rav Yosef's version, that if it's an area that is not subject to division, then you could go in based on brera. Hamudur hano mechavero v'yesh lo sham merchotz. The Mishnah described an individual from whom benefit was restricted, so that you have a madir imposing on a mudar the prohibition of benefiting, and the madir, the one who initiated the vow, happens to own a bathhouse or an olive press, and the olive press is rented out to an outsider, to some third party. The Mishnah said that the subject of the vow, the mudar, can enter the bathhouse, benefit from the bathhouse or the olive press, if the original owner, who is the madir, has no tfisas yad. That was an expression in the Mishnah. Tfisas yad, and tfisas yad literally means either he has or does not have a holding in it. Tfisas yad, his hand is holding it. So it means he has a holding in it. If the original owner, the madir, has no holding in it, then the mudar can go in, the property being viewed as being under the jurisdiction, under the control of the renter. The Gemara asks, "V'kama tfisas yad?" How much is tfisas yad? How do you define that? That if he, the madir, the original owner, still has a holding in it, the mudar will be restricted. Omar Rav Nachman lemechza l'shlishur l'ruvia avol bebotzir lo. If he has a holding in it, 50%, 33%, or 25%, that's considered significant. But if it's less than that, that's botzir. Means if it's less than that, his holding on it is considered of no significance, and the mudar can benefit from it. So that if the original owner, or the madir, is his share in the profits from this bathhouse or this olive press is less than 25%, according to Rav Nachman, the mudar is allowed to benefit from those properties. Abaye Omar, afilu bebotzir oser, even less than that is still reason enough to prohibit the mudar from benefiting. So, heichi domi deshori, according to Abaye, under what circumstances is it mutar for the mudar, from the subject of the vow, to benefit from that bathhouse or olive press? Answer, de mekabel betaska. Rashi says, de mekabel betaska. The word taska is an interesting word, because if you do a letter switch, the samach with the kuf, you could read it as tax, and that's exactly what taska is. Shekiblo hasocher loseis menu mas b'chol shana v'shana. If the arrangement is that the renter not only benefits from all of the profits, but the renter also pays the required taxes on it, the annual tax for that property, the bathhouse, the olive press, were the examples we saw, then it's considered mutter for the mudar to benefit from it. The Rosh also says, "Shenoisein hasocher mas." I'm reading from the end of the Rosh commentary. The socher, the renter, pays the taxes. V'oz nistalik balabayas legamri. And with that, then the original owner, who is the madir, he is completely removed. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.